Welcome everybody to Red Suit Interviews, and we are joined by a man, not yet mythical, waiting on the results, the legend, Mr. Bastiat. How are we today, sir?
Doing quite well, just having a nice, relaxing Sunday. Here streaming on Twitch. We had a pretty intense stream yesterday on the Raj Royale, this big program on Twitch. So today we're just kind of chilling out, having fun, playing with the cats, and just getting ready for the week ahead. So
Yeah,
everything's going good.
yeah, I saw that stream. Seems like it's done pretty well in your favor, in terms of some of the comments and how you sort of worked on that. Am I wrong with that one, or because?
No, I think so. I mean, it wasn't, it's never perfect, but I think we did pretty well yesterday. I think that was my first time doing the Raw show, and it was a lot of fun. And we got to the final round. We ended up losing to Hassan, of course, a big streamer on Twitch, by I think 51 to 49% of the vote. So it was pretty close, but nevertheless, it was a pretty good showing for the first time in Raj. And I'm looking forward to the next time. So.
Yeah. So I guess initially, just from there, is you've only recently started streaming. So how did you initially get into it?
Sure. So I had a friend who referred me to Twitch earlier this year, and the first person that she referred me to was somebody on Twitch by the name of Destiny, who you talked to last week, right? And that was the first guy I watched on Twitch. I watched some of his debates with right wingers, kind of extremists like Nick Fuentes, the way he would kind of demolish those types of people. And I enjoyed just watching his content. I watched a few other streamers too after that, and I figured, hey, you know what? Maybe I could do this too. So I started the Twitch account in June. I just kind of screwed around a little bit for a few days during June and July, and I decided to commit to it more regularly in August. And we've been doing pretty well, in terms of just kind of clawing our way onward and upward since then. So,
Yeah. I guess for those who don't know, I guess I may have done this in a little wrong order, but for those who don't know, what do you do specifically? Like, what is your,
sure.
I guess, branding with Twitch?
Yeah. So I started off playing some games early on. I played Stardew Valley, and I played I played a few hours of this game called Europa Universalis. And I played Super Mario Maker 2. Like, that was my first few weeks on Twitch. And I realized that nobody was really interested, or very few people were interested in watching me kind of half-heartedly play games on Twitch. But what was fun was when people would ask me about myself, like, hey, you're a lawyer. What's that like? Stuff like that. And so we started talking about politics because, of course, that's a really burgeoning area on Twitch. I think Destiny kind of started that Twitch politics sort of category, not like the official category on Twitch, but the notion of talking about politics on Twitch. I think he started that and made a space for it, and since then it really has been growing, I think. Especially this election cycle. I think this next year, from now until the U.S. election in November of 2020, is going to be a big year for growth on political Twitch. I mean, it's crazy. We have, for example, people in our channel, and I've seen this in other channels from all over the world, who are like almost personally invested in U.S. politics. It's pretty incredible, really, the way that some folks from other countries have a as strong or a stronger command of American politics than some Americans do. So it's a big subject that is really growing here on Twitch, and I think like somebody in the chat just said, Shilovitz said, people want smart conversations, and there are a lot of those going on Twitch. So we try and do that here with some talk about politics, law, and economics. We do a tiny bit of philosophy, I suppose. Occasionally, we'll do we'll talk about conspiracy theories or some other fun nonsense. But for the most part, we talk about politics here, and it's a lot of fun.
No, I get what you're saying with that. Touching on there with the political or the election, who's your front runner for you in the next election?
As in, who do I like the best?
Yeah.
Well, right now I like Andrew Yang the best, but I will be voting for whoever the Democrat is. And I see you're laughing. What you're laughing at the Andrew Yang answer. What's up with that, man?
Well, it's just like I was not expecting that.
No, what were you expecting exactly?
I not Yang. Um,
Yeah. Did you have anybody you were expecting?
Not really. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Just anyone but
Yeah.
Yang.
Wow. Yeah. No,
You know
I
what? John
like him.
Delaney. That's the one.
Yeah,
Okay.
John Delaney. Well, now I will say John Delaney does have a special place in my heart. If John Delaney had any chance, I think I would definitely be the first to call myself a Delaney-ac. Um,
That is perfect.
yeah, I didn't make that.
I
didn't
feel
make
like
that
you
one
would
up,
be the
but
first though.
I think that would be fun. John Delaney early on had this policy that really turned me off of him of a mandatory national service
Oh
program.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think he has since walked that back, but that would have been the kind of real like coercive government program that I mean it just is okay. So Filthy Steve says his national service is not mandatory. By the way, I think at one time it was. I may be mistaken, but that was what turned me off of him from him at first. Maybe I just misunderstood. But yeah, I think John Delaney, he makes a lot of good points. Even recently, he said that Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, while he disagreed with their particulars, were basically right on the notion that coverage for healthcare should be universal. And I thought that was pretty cool. Oh, by the way, somebody in my channel is saying that the stream there's a bit of an echo on your end with my
Yep,
stream.
yep.
So
That's
if there's something you can do, no worries if not.
Yep.
But yeah, I like Andrew Yang. I like two of his big ideas: the universal basic income and his democracy dollars idea, which would be a kind of bottom up public financing of political campaigns, where basically every American would get $100 that they could spend on a political campaign each electoral cycle. Under our Constitution, I don't think you could ever limit the amount of money that people can spend on what are called political action committees,
Yep.
super PACs. I don't think you can do that under not only under the recent Supreme Court, well, not recent, but relatively recent, as in within the last 10 years, Supreme Court decision, Citizens United. But even then, I just don't know what the constitutional argument would be for restricting speech in that fashion. But you can, I guess, subsidize more political activity without violating the Constitution. So I think that's a good way to address that. And public financing of campaigns has been so weak in recent history because it's been like top down, where a candidate is faced with the choice of, well, do I accept what I think is I think it's a pretty paltry sum of public money, or do I forego that public money and go for almost unlimited private fundraising? So usually they go for the private fundraising anyway. And Andrew Yang's idea is that this would, by his calculation, wash out corporate money by a factor of 8 to 1, which is kind of cool. And that's as somebody who has been involved in the political process, in the corporate world. I mean, nevertheless, as a private citizen, I recognize that's not ideal. So he's, I think, got the most realistic ideas for dealing with that. And of course, I like universal basic income as a better form of welfare program. Universal, you don't lose it by virtue of trying to improve your life by getting a better job or something like that. And he also believes in Medicare for all, which I think is kind of the third big idea that I like. Although, of course, he's not particularly specific on how his plan would work, so that's a little more vague. But yeah, so I like that. He's got some smaller policies, policies that get less attention that I'm not that big a fan of. But his flagship policies I think are really strong. So
Okay, understandably. Going back from when you're talking about your experience as a lawyer,
yeah,
you're in a very interesting position because you have a very prominent, I guess, personal life. You have a success in your own fields in that way. Do you ever worry about now that you're coming into like the Twitch community and that can become, I don't know, a little bit toxic? Do you worry about this potentially affecting your other sort of career?
Oh yeah. No, I have no doubt that that's a risk. I mean, right now the people that I work with, are aware of what I do and occasionally watch. So, I keep that in mind. But they're pretty cool about it. But I mean, ultimately, anytime you say something and put it on the internet, you're coming at it. You are facing the risk of your statements being used against you someday, which is just a fact of life today. I guess I take some solace in the notion, though, that I think the way that the kind of the ubiquity now of maybe not the ubiquity, but just the nature of how much is out there now, how much content and how many statements are out there, and the increasing awareness that statements can be very easily taken out of context. I guess I like to think that someday, if I'm called out for something in a way that threatens my career, I could at least, assuming I'm always being upfront and honest with what I say, I can at least make a defense of whatever opinion I've expressed that would be solid. So I don't know. When I get things wrong, I try to correct it and apologize after the fact. But I do, so I guess be short about it. I do sometimes worry about it, but at the same time, I guess if you worry about it too much, that basically just means you shouldn't express any opinions on the internet ever, right? So
yeah, unless
and
it's
that's
in
the
front of
safest
like a
thing
large
to do.
audience,
You know? I do try to avoid, like anything that would dox me, but at the same time, I know that I haven't been perfect with that, and I'm sure that if somebody was committed enough, they could, figure out what's up and try and, I guess ruin my life in some way. So we'll see. We'll deal with it as it comes our way. But fingers crossed, we'll be all right.
And getting more specifically, not trying to obviously get into like, which company you work for and that sort of thing, obviously not to dox you in that way. But you're saying you work for fossil fuel companies in terms of being their legal representation. So what does that sort of entail for you?
It means I work with I work in what is called the competitive energy sector. So not for like monopoly utilities, but for competitive energy suppliers. And that just means that I counsel them on risk management, sometimes tax questions, complying with state and federal and occasionally local regulations, and just kind of run of the mill stuff. Occasionally there may be some political angle to some kind of project I'm working on. But generally speaking, it's pretty much confined to all that. I'd say if I was going to give it two words to describe it all, it would be risk management. So that's a good way to think about. At least I think a good way to think about corporate law.
So we're not going to see you doing the ace attorney sort of guilty thing.
No.
Okay.
I've been to court before, but that's not really a normal part.
Okay, but you weren't the person on defending. You were the one in the.
Yeah. Our goal generally is to stay out of court. We don't want any that. There's not much to win in court. I think generally from a corporate perspective, unless something has already gone wrong. We want to avoid court as far as possible. We want to try and follow the straight and narrow and avoid getting into troublesome situations. We want to negotiate good contracts that that have clear terms that you can resolve without having to go to court. In court, because court's expensive, it's difficult, it takes time, and it's often unpredictable. So, you want to generally avoid that if you can. So.
Yeah. So obviously you're not sort of working necessarily on like a. You're working more from like a financial perspective or more regulatory.
Just to be clear, and I know somebody in the chat asked, when I say risk management, I mean like managing legal risk, not like financial risk. So.
Yeah. So more like regulatory, legally sort of thing. Not necessarily like environmental sort of.
I haven't worked on any of that yet. I don't really have occasionally I'll get pilloried for something involving like you're with those people who are trying to hide and minimize climate change. I've never worked for anybody like that, and that's not what I do.
So how do you distinguish the difference then between those?
Well, there or at least there were. I don't know if companies are still doing this, but for a long time there were companies, especially in the oil industry, that were actively trying to spread misinformation about climate change. I think Exxon was especially notorious on this. Let me look this up before I drag Exxon Mobil through the mud. Exxon, 1970s, climate change. Just a second. I just want to be right about this before I say that they were the ones doing this. Okay, Exxon's own research, Yeah, Exxon was tracking climate science in the late 1970s. Their own research confirmed fossil fuels' role in global climate change. And for anybody who's curious, here's a link to the chat about it. So they've been lobbying on the issue, and they are very problematic. They've been very problematic on the issue, to say the least, right?
Okay, so yeah, talking about like that problematic thing. So you obviously you're saying that companies you work with don't sort of go down that
Yeah.
path.
No, I don't do that. I wouldn't be comfortable with that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that's I don't know if these companies are still behind this. Presumably they are. Well, I shouldn't say presumably they are. I mean, somebody's funding climate change denial, right? So I'm not sure who it is. One of the problems, one of the problems, and arguably one of the benefits of our system of electoral politics is that it's hard to find the ultimate source of the money that goes into politics. Now that may seem strange to say that that's good, but of course, if you're engaged in an unpopular but nevertheless noble cause, like maybe opposing some kind of large vested corporate interest, it's nice to be insulated from the risk that comes with having your name on something. But nevertheless, that does make it hard to see where the money's ultimately coming from. So,
yeah. So, going on top of that as well, do you think that sort of how you work, or the industry you work in, and also the Tucker Carlson look, do you think that negatively impacts sort of how you initially perceived?
Oh, probably, but it's part of life. It's like that fella Dan, the landlord. He's friends with Destiny. Have you seen his streams?
Yeah.
Yeah, Harp Dan. He probably is referencing himself as a landlord for similar reasons. It's fun to talk a little bit about what you do. As far as I understand, that's not even a very big part of what he does. It's a part of it, but it's fun to reference yourself and what you do, and to be able to talk about your specialty sometimes, and also to be able to talk about a specialty that maybe is controversial at first blush, but when you talk about it with people, is a lot more reasonable than it might otherwise sound. So I do like to use, for example, the word fossil fuels specifically, even though I don't just work with fossil fuels. That's the majority of what I do, but but I do like to use that word sometimes just to see if anybody is especially interested in pushing back on that. So there's a little bit there, but at the same time, it is what I do. So
understandable. Yeah, I don't think Dan's too much of a fan of the last interview with Destiny. Because,
why not?
Mainly because he came on. Did you hear when I asked because I talked with Destiny about sort of the Soviet iconography. And then
I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing, but
okay. Well, I compared basically. I said, you've been very harsh on the Soviet iconography. Do you, with like the Eat the Landlord or all that sort of stuff?
Yeah.
Do you feel like with Dan how he does his sort of thing with was it the ACAB or was it ATAB?
Oh yeah, ATAB. All tenants are bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like this is a similar thing? And then Destiny, he responded quite well and quite responsibly. And then Dan came on afterwards and was kind of miffed over it. So I was like, ugh.
Well, I don't know that I'd say that all tenants are bad is the same as a hammer and sickle.
Oh no, but it's just
I would be. I feel like that. Like it's definitely intended to be a meme. But it's also an example of, I think, the desire to stir up a little bit. Stir up a little bit of outrage, because especially just like Twitter. I know Twitter is not a microcosm of the real world. It's like it's very I think extreme in a way that the real world is not always, but. There's a lot of hate for landlords on Twitter. A lot of memes about kill all landlords and Mao is right. So, I understand the desire to push back with a little bit of nonsense in response. But.
Speaking of which, like coming from your, I guess, more sort of mainstream sort of success, now coming into this like weird niche online political thing, how has that been for you now? Like, were you already sort of involved somewhat with sort of like Twitter politics, or has this been how has that sort of been for you getting into all this?
I don't know. It's I only started. I have a Twitter with like I think 600 followers, so it's pretty small. I never really. I was never really into it until I started doing the stream, and the point of the Twitter, I guess, is basically to bring more people to the stream. and it is pretty crazy how extreme it can be sometimes. But at the same time, I guess it's it's nothing, I suppose, out of the ordinary of the usual sort of extreme views that come through on the internet, right? I mean, it just the extreme rises to the top, right? And it is what it is. But yeah, I don't know. I follow a lot of neoliberals on Twitch, or not on Twitch, on Twitter. I don't know that there are a lot of neoliberals on Twitch yet, but I follow them on Twitter, and even then, like, the extremism is kind of a meme. Like, I'm for extreme YIMBY, which is to say yes in my backyard, which is shorthand for I think that zoning restrictions should be lifted and people should be able to build whatever they want, almost wherever they want. Which is not actually a particularly extreme position. It basically means that that if you want to deal with housing shortages, rather than incentivizing public construction and using rent controls, you should just free up people to use their land more effectively to house more people on it. Whereas there are a lot of cities. I don't know what the situation is like in Australia, but I know in certain American cities like San Francisco in particular, the zoning laws have made it so hard to build new construction, mass density residential construction, that as a result, there's a massive housing shortage there. Property values are through the roof, but rents are through the roof as well. So it's a pretty miserable place to build homes for low income people. And I think the answer to that is kind of that neoliberal position of rollback zoning. Let people take full advantage of their land and build, as dense as they like. So,
Yes.
anyway, I forget even what the original point. Gosh, I've been rambling here.
That's fine. I
I guess that's the kind of extremism I like.
lukewarm.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Let's be very Han about incremental change. I like that.
Yeah. That's a good way. Yeah, an extreme moderate, as I think Benjamin Franklin once said.
Yeah. And just touching on, I don't know much about housing in Australia. I just know it's ridiculously expensive recently, but that's just I can add to that. You talked also before about the difficulties with trying to keep your platform, I guess. Try and be as responsible as you can. Going into more sort of areas like that, what do you think's been the hardest thing for you on streaming?
Let's see. Hardest thing, I guess. Probably the hardest thing is to put a lot of time into it without like losing absolutely, all touch with like your real life. Like, I've been streaming a lot lately in the last few months, and it definitely comes at a cost to your personal relationships, because if you spend all your non-working hours streaming on Twitch, I mean, you're losing out on time with, for me, time with my fiance, who's been really great in giving me, some time and space to really build something here. So that to me is probably the hardest part. Other than that, I suppose kind of another hard part is this isn't really nearly as hard, but moderating the chat. Like, I don't know if you just saw the comment that I just timed somebody out.
Yep. It was a good paragraph. I love that one.
Yeah. Like that, you want to moderate things without making people feel like it's no fun in the chat, so that's tough sometimes, but that I guess that's really about it. Otherwise, it's a lot of fun. This is something that's tough for me. Organization. I am so disorganized with this. Organization has always been challenging for me professionally. Like, it's just hard for me to keep up with everything sometimes. I really like to focus on one thing and just kind of go at it. But doing the streaming thing is like super multitasking, right? So I'm trying to get better at organization with that. That's been a real challenge, and hopefully over the long term I'll get better at that. But that I think is probably my biggest challenge, apart from just the figuring out a balance with a schedule.
Yeah, understandably, and going even further on sort of discussion, because we talked about that before. Have you been interested in going further in debate? Because obviously you're more... I'm not 100% too sure, but it seems like you don't sort of go too hard specifically in debate content. You more sort of talk to your about. things?
Yeah, I've thought about that. We had kind of a pretty intense debate yesterday on the Raj show.
Yeah.
I would like to do some more of that, but I guess I don't. I don't know. I don't like to get like the Raj format seems to invite a little bit of personal attacks back and forth. I generally don't enjoy that, and
Mm.
I generally enjoy kind of more traditional debates as opposed to the shouting matches that are sometimes popular on Twitch. But there's an attorney on Twitch who comes at things from a conservative perspective by the name of Lecture Fan.
Yeah.
We had a good debate with him on universal basic income, and I think we're going to do one on immigration sometime soon. I just have to schedule it because, again, I need to get better at organizing everything here on on Twitch. Yeah, we've talked about doing it. We just got to settle on a date. And for example, I like a liberal immigration policy, and he presumably does not. So it should be a fun discussion. And yeah, so I like debates like that. We had a good one in the past. I think we'll have a good one again in the future. I was going to reach out to Hassan to see if he'd be interested in one sometime. We talked yesterday at the very end of the stream after he won the vote when I was heading out. I was like, hey, do you want to talk about universal basic income sometime? And he said, yeah, I'd be interested in that. So maybe we'll be able to set something up and do that sometime.
Oh, that'd be
And
fun.
I think at some point I'm gonna have a discussion with Destiny about personal autonomy as a value in like public policy, and we'll see. Maybe that'll be the one where the bridge is burned. I don't know. Kind of doubt it, but might be. Somebody on his Reddit was saying, yeah, as soon as they talk about that, it's all going to hell. No more friendship there. But we'll see. So, and there's another streamer, like Han, in the chat mentioned a streamer by the name of Wire Guitar, who is a recently converted democratic socialist who wants to talk about like socialism versus capitalism. A lot of people seem to want to talk about that with me because I guess I kind of look the part of the capitalism debate with the flag pin and the blue suit. But yeah, so lots to that. It basically requires time to set them up, and so I need to work on doing more of that. But I'd like to for sure.
Yeah. Those two interesting things there, just that I sort of thought of, is so first one with the capitalist versus socialism arguments. A lot of the topics you talk about, especially, are very, like we said, the extreme moderate positions. I don't necessarily know, do you care about doing debates specifically about capitalism versus socialism? Because it seems like it's more sort of, it's pretty big, it's pretty broad, you know, there's nothing like really...
Yeah. Like, it breaks down a lot, for example. Like, I feel like it's so big that it's not as interesting. I mean, I'm definitely open to do it, but I think, for example, one way it breaks down super fast is... like, okay, so when you're talking about socialism, are you talking about like 20th century socialism, or are you talking about some form of socialism that is existed only on paper? And if so, are you comparing that paper form of socialism with actually existing capitalism, or with some form of capitalism that exists only on paper, right? And if you're comparing actually existing with your theoretical model, then it's kind of a strange argument at that point in time, because basically your theoretical model can never be falsified because it hasn't been tried yet. So that's one thing. Another thing that often I notice happens in the capitalism versus socialism debate is that people who are not willing to stand by, like the USSR and China, and most people are not, surprisingly enough, right? Sometimes they'll stand up for like smaller examples of communist regimes, like Cuba. Like they'll say that, well, China and Russia were bad, but Cuba worked out pretty good. Or sort of the more anarcho-communists out there will talk about the Ukraine from like 1917 to 1920, or like anarchist Catalonia from 1936 to 1939. Very like niche example. So I need to like specifically brush up on some of those niche examples to be able to talk with them about it, because I'm more of a China and Russia historical sort of guy. But yeah, I'm open to it. I just think it's more interesting to talk about specific issues.
So what would you say would be like your ultimate, like your top sort of specific issues that you care most about, especially in sort of discussions?
Well, I guess the most interesting one that I have that we've talked about recently was free speech. I really enjoy that. Like free speech in the sense of I will always take the position of defending the First Amendment as it is practiced in the United States or as it's implemented in the United States. The First Amendment being the part of our Constitution that guarantees freedom of expression. So I'm typically kind of a First Amendment absolutist, as it were. And that position seems to be generally unpopular, at least in terms of the people who react to it. Most people seem to want some kind of controls on speech, whether they be conservatives who want to maintain laws that prohibit obscenity or allow the prohibition of obscenity. Being, I guess, either some extreme form of violence, sexual content, or foul language, or liberal, not liberal types, really, like left wing types who want to prohibit hate speech, who want to prohibit any kind of denigration of groups, um, uh, whether it be, uh, the kind of stuff that like Nazis do, or
Just Nazi stuff. We'll just say
like
that.
basic. That's a good catch-all. Like Nazi stuff is like always the go-to example because basically the Nazis are the worst group of worst political entity in the history of the world. So it's super easy to argue that the Nazis, like, why should we allow that? So pretty much all our free speech discussions end up with some discussion about the Nazis. Because it's everybody on either side of the issue can agree. Yeah, the Nazis are pretty much the worst political message you could express ever. So the free speech discussion is always kind of fun in that sense because it both sides, if you go far enough, want to prohibit some kind of speech, and generally the only speech I want to prohibit is violent speech, as in to say speech that is an incitement to what the Supreme Court has called imminent lawless action. So if you're trying to stir up violence, and there's like an imminent violence, not just some kind of long-term political violence, not just saying like I think so and so group should be out of the country, right? Like imminent violence, like I think we should go downtown and beat up this group of people, right? I think that should be prohibited, and of course, indeed, it is. And then also fraud, should, to the extent fraud is done with speech, I mean, it's still fraud. And then I think that there's a place in our civil law for libel, slander, defamation, basically, where you defame somebody. So, for example, if I had Exxon is a big company, a very public company, so I don't know that this would have made much difference either way. But I like to look up criticism before I stand by it, right? I like to try and source myself because I like to be accurate. Because of course, in the final analysis, if you tell something that is untrue, you do risk defaming somebody, right? And they may have a cause of action for that. So I think that that's a very reasonable part of our law. I don't think it's reasonable the way that it's done in Great Britain, where the libel laws are what I would call very loose. And I would imagine that Australia also, in fact, I think I've heard that Australia has some pretty loose libel laws too that are sometimes used.
They're really weird. That's the best way to put it.
I believe they're sometimes used to oppress speech, although I'm not an expert on that.
Well,
that's what I've heard.
Fun fact, there's going to be a religious or religion protection discrimination act possibly being passed where we'll do a lot of weird stuff in there. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. So I generally argue against that kind of thing. That's like my favorite issue to talk about lately.
Yeah, and going specifically into that, you're talking your difference or like your limits on sort of free speech. Do you see protective classes in that is being encompassing into that as well?
No, I guess the way I view free speech, there's no room for discussion about like protected classes. Protected classes have a role in other forms of law, I think, like employment law.
Okay.
You don't want to allow people to fire somebody because of their racial or ethnic background, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But that I think is a response to like 2 or more centuries of discrimination backed by force of law in the opposite direction. So I think freedom of speech, though, I see no justification for any kind of protected classes or groups of people that it is more or less appropriate to talk about in the sense of government action. Now, I think private actors, whether they be individuals or companies, should be able to respond to speech in whatever way they see fit, except, of course, violence. So if you don't like what your employee says on Twitter, you should totally be free to fire them for it. If you don't like what somebody says on Twitch, you should totally be free to ask Twitch to ban them for it. And Twitch should be totally free to ban them for it if they want, or not to ban them for it. But my interest is in how government responds, because when government is taking action, it is entirely different from what private actors are doing. Private actors can basically deny you access to their resources, whether it be, deny you access to your job, which of course is not really your job, it's a job you have, or Twitch can deny you access to their platform, but they're not ultimately denying you your freedom of speech. You just, you have to go make a platform for yourself in that situation. But when the government outlaws speech, then they are directly prohibiting you from expressing yourself, or fining or imprisoning you, and that's a whole other league of oppression. So,
Okay. Going back just before you said the protective class thing, in specific, you said that it's obviously a reaction to the history within societies and whatever.
Yeah.
Do you think without that history there that you would support protective classes in that sort of essence?
No, if there was no history backing up the justification for giving people extra protection in the law, then no, I would want to treat everybody completely equally under the law. And I think eventually the case for these kinds of protections will disappear as society, becomes more tolerant, and the harms done by government in the past, in the United States, for example, Jim Crow laws, the harms done by the century or more of those laws, and the centuries of slavery that, were also backed by law and also preceded the Jim Crow laws. Once some of that intolerance has really receded in our society, I think then there's a case to say, okay, do we still need these legal protections? But of course, we're not there yet, and I don't know when we will be. That's an analysis for, I think, future generation to make. But that to me is the justification for these kinds of laws that protect protected classes, is previous historical discrimination by the state. So, yeah.
Okay. So you're not bothered necessarily if discrimination happens outside of that historical context. So, in terms of, I'm trying to word this sort of appropriately, and try not to, say anything too dumb.
Sure.
So it wouldn't necessarily inherently bother you in terms of if we get to a point that discrimination happens without, as long as that people on a social level are seen as equals. Treated
as long as people,
how do I word that probably without being
as long as people are, no, I get what you're saying. I think as long as people have true legal equality, then I think social equality will eventually follow. And I think that what we've done right now, I think our current laws on protected classes are meant to ameliorate all the damage done from generations of state law that basically entrenched inequality and oppression. State law as in the law of the state, not just individual American states, although of course that was a problem too. So I think slavery, for example, in the United States, I'm not saying that was a government only thing, of course, slaves were privately owned. I don't know if some slaves were ever owned by the U.S. government. I'm not sure, but they were certainly contracted out by the U.S. government. But slavery could not have existed without a system of law that protected the system of slavery. And indeed, in slavery's final century, there were a lot of laws that almost required people in some places to, they prohibited manumission, that is to say freeing of slaves, in a lot of circumstances. So slavery was backed by clear state action, right? And then the discrimination that followed was also backed by state action. The Jim Crow laws that came after slavery that nevertheless enmeshed racism in our legal system. So those laws only began to come off the books in the 1960s, at least in a meaningful way. And it's going to take a long time to remedy the generations of damage that were done by all those laws. But I do think someday in the future, once that history is a long way behind us, then I don't know that you need special laws to address that kind of discrimination. Because of course, ultimately, like the freedom to like say open a business, right, and to serve whatever customers you want, right? Well, I guess that freedom is ultimately infringed on in a sense when you say you can't discriminate. And I guess ideally everybody would be free to serve whoever they want, and on and on and on. And then in an ideal market that hasn't been colored by 300 years of racist law, like why would you ever discriminate against your customers on the basis of race? Because you're shooting yourself in the foot there. But we're just not there yet, and I don't know when we will be, in the sense of just remedying all the years and years of state enforced racial discrimination that we had in this country, and I think other countries have had too. Although I'm not an expert on that.
Okay, even just going last sort of thing on that, it's like,
yeah.
Do you think though, if we got to the point like it's like we remove those protective classes, that it could though revert back any sort of social progress it made, that if there isn't sort of that safety net of like you can't do this, that it could encourage sort of a new movement or a new sort of thing that could take place?
I mean, I guess that's always a risk when you don't have the forces of law behind something, but I mean ultimately I don't think so. I think that that discrimination, I think, was chiefly the result of law rather than something that was exemplified by the law, So, and I think the law in like just as an example, in the United States, and especially in its early history, and this wasn't a popularly determined law. It was a law, passed down by the elites who kind of controlled the societies of their time, right? Democracy in the early United States, in the pre-independence United States, was very limited in terms of who exercised a franchise, and they had very unique interests. And one of those was just, for example, preserving a system of slavery and racial separation. So I don't know that those kinds of systems, I don't know that kind of racism would arise organically without a government to basically put it into effect and then scar the population with it for centuries. So I don't really worry about it reemerging after a long period of government action to remediate all the damage that had been done in the past. I think that indeed anti-racist action in this country emerged organically, and then government got behind it and really pushed it. Like the civil rights protesters, for example, in the 1960s, really led the movement, and then government came in behind them to solidify the gains or to make the gains official. So that's my take on it. I trust individual people to make the right decisions more often than not. And I think that government action is what has chiefly is what gave racism such and other forms of discrimination in our country too, religious discrimination, so on and so forth, is what gave that kind of discrimination so much power historically.
Okay. So. Well, now jumping back, because I said I was going to make 2 points with what you started looking at with. You said you were going to talk to Destiny about what was it again that you were talking specifically about?
Oh yeah, we had a discussion very briefly about the sugar tax on another podcast that we were both on. He, I think, was taking a month off of podcast, but he was really interested in this one particular subject of the sugar tax or the soda tax. Mm-hmm. That he hopped in for a bit. And on this particular discussion, I think it was 7 people. I think there were 8 people on the podcast total, maybe 10. But either way, I was the only one, I think, arguing against the soda tax because I thought basically it's an infringement on autonomy that the government has no business imposing. And everybody else was saying either we should impose the sugar tax or we should impose the sugar tax or the soda tax along with a wholesale reformation of our socioeconomic system. And I think Destiny came in to say, no, your argument against the soda tax, like everybody else's but mine, your argument doesn't make any sense, because how can you be for fixing these big things but against fixing these small things? Like where's the contradiction here? At least that's the argument that I saw. Like, this is proven to reduce obesity, and on, right? And then
By the way, you can go harder. He's got 11,000 viewers right now, and he's talking to someone. Okay, he's not going to come after us just yet. Okay.
No, I mean, I don't really have anything hard to say on that. But what was let's see, what was it? Yeah. So then after that part of the discussion, I was going to challenge him on the autonomy issue. He hopped off, and then before he left, though, he left the call, but before he left the Discord discussion, he left a message saying basically personal autonomy is fake. Everything is determined by environmental anyway, so screw that. Tax people to improve their behavior, basically. So at some point, we'll probably have a discussion on that. We're going to play some kind of video game tomorrow called Human Fall Flat, so maybe it'll come up then. Okay. Although, considering we're going to be playing the game at like midnight, I'm not hoping for a big debate at like midnight or whatever. But okay, we'll see. Maybe it'll happen.
Okay, so you're coming from a position of sort of, people can choose what they want. You shouldn't really, I guess.
Yeah, like, especially considering, like, especially from a policy perspective, right now the United States subsidizes a lot of food and probably subsidizes obesity. So rather than subsidizing it and then taxing it, maybe you should just stop subsidizing it and see how that goes.
Okay, I understand that. So, I guess now moving on to, I guess, your future goals with streaming. Yeah. Obviously, this is nowhere near probably where you classify as like the main sort of potential career at this point in time.
Yeah, sure.
But do you see this potentially becoming a, this becoming your main career, or do you still want to have that lawyer legal side to your life as well?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd ever stop being a lawyer, and of course right now it seems pretty far away. We're hovering around 80 viewers, right? That's a far cry from the 11,000 that Destiny does this full time on. Yeah. But nevertheless it's fun, and we've made some money. We've reinvested all the money into basically a new computer, a good camera, lighting, all that good stuff here. Sushia, a good friend of the channel, just hopped in to say lawyers make more than streamers. Depends on the streamer and depends on the lawyer. But that being said, I would probably never want to give it up completely, because it's, I went to school for it for a while, and I do enjoy it. But hey, maybe we strike it big someday, and I do it less and do streaming more. I don't know, but I'm not sure.
What do you enjoy about being the lawyer that you are?
Well, now being the lawyer, like being like a lawyer guy on Twitch, or about being a lawyer?
Both, I guess.
Okay. Well, lawyer guy on Twitch, it's just fun to talk about these issues. It's fun to wear a suit. It's kind of the part of the whole thing. And it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to educate people on the issue. Although sometimes I'll have law students call in who are like super already like up to date on cases. They are like recalling this stuff very well. It's fresher to them, I suppose, than it is to me, depending on the issue. But yeah, so I learned too from people here. But as far as being a lawyer, I know it's just a really interesting intellectual exercise. I feel like, in a way, depending on the issue, it's kind of like sort of giving life to our constitutional guarantees. I mean, sometimes it really is just minimizing risk, minimizing legal risk. But sometimes, depending on the issue, you really are giving life to whatever, a particular constitutional right is at issue, which I think is pretty cool. So just depends on the issue, but I do find it very fulfilling. Maybe not all the time. Sometimes maybe what I'm doing is boring or whatever, but generally speaking, I find it pretty cool, pretty fulfilling. And I know that I don't know that I'd ever want to give it up all the way, but okay. It's fun talking about. I think it's fun doing that on Twitch, talking about law on Twitch, just because it's fun talking about things that I don't normally encounter. Like as somebody who works in the corporate side of things, I don't really deal with free speech, and the First Amendment, as part of my job. But it's fun to delve into that side of law here on the stream. So.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't provide, like, I never provide any kind of individual like legal advice or anything that could be construed as that
unless
on
they
the stream.
pay, of
but
course.
It's fun to. Well, unless like I have extended the offer to anybody in the chat who is an energy company that I'd be willing to talk with them. But other than that, I don't do that. We talk about high level stuff that really isn't of too much value in your individual life anyway, for the most part, unless you're going to end up before the Supreme Court, like the First Amendment, for example. That body of case law is pretty well settled. not completely, but it's pretty well settled. So it's more about discussing the values behind it than the how this might apply to you in your individual life. So,
Okay.
mhm.
And big question here. What do you think is currently the biggest political issue for you?
Hmm. Biggest political issue for me. I don't know. I guess it depends on what you mean by that. But I feel like to me, the biggest thing I worry about in our modern politics is the rise of authoritarianism, a sort of like excessive veneration of political figures and a desire to work around or maybe work past democracy, um, a desire to have more state power and control in the economy, whether it be for socialist goals or nationalist goals. So that kind of is the thing that most disturbs me and that kind of most animates me. Uh, I think universal health care is also a really important subject. I think we really need that in this country to kind of stem the rise of this populism that has really taken hold in our country. It's just such a visceral issue that everybody has a difficult experience with, or most people have some kind of difficult, an anecdote of a difficult experience with. Because in the United States we don't have a universal health care like most other developed countries. I presume, including Australia, have.
Hmm.
So it's pretty. That one, I think, is one that we really need to solve much sooner rather than later. And of course, I guess climate change. Although I don't presume to be an expert on all the science there, I do often get asked about it though because I work in the fossil fuel business, and I always tell people that we need to subsidize nuclear energy and renewables, but particularly nuclear energy because it's available even when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And to the extent it comes with risks, those risks are outweighed by the immediate and clear risks of climate change. So I guess that would probably be the three things that I'm biggest on:
Okay.
energy, universal health care, and anti-authoritarianism.
Okay. Going back to your first thing with the obviously with the overreach with the government is one of the big
Yeah.
issues you sort of are faced with. Uh,
Yeah.
you obviously don't mean obviously the Medicare for all, which a lot of sort of I guess conservative people bring up
Yeah.
as that's the
Yeah.
overreach. What to
Yeah,
you
a
is
lot
the
of people would view
overreach?
that. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people would view that as overreach. I feel like there's probably no other way to provide affordable healthcare in the modern world. I have not seen the free market panacea for healthcare that I've often heard talked about, but I have some folks in our community who are looking forward to educating me on that. Maybe I'll change my mind. But yeah, I think more like like government policies that interfere with your ability to make decisions. So, for example, my ideal universal healthcare situation would be not like, say, Canada and Great Britain, where they have a government provided healthcare option that is generally monopolistic. Although in the UK, I know there are some exceptions to that. I don't like that. I'd like something more like I think Germany, France, Japan, and other countries have. I'm not sure what they do in Australia, but
Australia,
where
public
you can,
option, private option. That's the
yeah, something like that. I think that would be ideal, because then people could choose, but nobody would be left out. And I'm not sure if that would be as efficient as like say Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan, where it's like the government is the provider. But I think that individual choice and some semblance of competition should still be maintained if possible. It's just that people should have at the end of the day universal coverage, I guess, through a single payer, even though there are multiple providers. So that's not what I mean by government overreach. What I generally mean is stuff like tariffs, trade restrictions, speech restrictions, um, immigration restrictions, all of that stuff I really don't like. I also don't like laws that are designed to coerce corporations. So, for example, a law that is designed to require worker representation on a board of directors. I think people should be free to start companies that are democratically managed and organized if they want to. But I think to take a corporation's shares or to dictate who they have to have on their board of directors and what their qualifications have to be is again a really ridiculous form of overreach into private property rights and individual freedom. So I don't like that kind of government overreach. Some people would say that universal health care is another form of government overreach. But again, I think if you're not dictating the provider you have to go to, then at the end of the day, the government overreach there is one, in the sense of infringing on the private market by creating some kind of government alternative, which is a fact, but which the government has often done in the past, and which is, I mean, to some degree, government always does that with courts, the military, and police. Those are things that I guess could be privately provided in some sense, but we have decided that those are better publicly provided. So beyond that, I also think that some people will say that any kind of taxation is government infringement. I think too much taxation is government infringement, but at the same time, that minimal government we talked about just a second ago that some people advocate for, of courts, police, and the military, still requires taxation, which is still done by force at the end of the day. So I think that to say that any kind of taxation is government overreach is too far.
Just touching on that one, especially the tax is theft sort of argument that gets brought up. This seems like it's a very specific. This comes up a lot with like online arguments, especially this idea of like the extreme sort of positions, like landlords are all terrible or whatever, and that sort of thing. Coming in now from, I guess, your mainstream thing, how have you tried to traverse this, where it's like mainly the ideas that people are talking about are things that we sort of already have taken for granted in society? Like we don't treat taxes like a theft. Yeah.
I think that sometimes to use the word theft, I think that to use the word theft is typically misplaced because we do have a democratic system. And, but ultimately, though, while it's misplaced, I don't think it's wrong to say that taxation is theft, because at the end of the day, if you don't pay your taxes, you are arrested and imprisoned, on pain of physical
Clip and chip
force.
Bastiat, Ben Shapiro, that's so good. All right, that's how we're going to do it.
I mean, it is ultimately a kind of theft, but at the same time, it's absolutely necessary for any kind of free society to exist, because without some form of government, I'm not one who believes that the state of nature would be an improvement over over the society we've got now. So, I think that it is basically, as somebody in the chat just said, a necessary kind of theft. But so in that sense, I then don't like to dwell on the word theft. But I think that you can say it is. It's just it's necessary for the system to work.
It's kind of It seems like it's an irrelevant talking point.
Typically, the time that I think it's worth remembering is when people are very eager to say, well, let's tax for other purposes that maybe aren't necessary. Like, let's tax solely for the purpose of reducing inequality. And I think that you've got to have a higher bar than just like, well, let's tax for this thing I think is socially desirable, because taxation is a kind of theft at the end of the day. So the fact that it is just socially desirable just on its own, I don't know. I mean, that seems like that can cover a lot. So I think that it means to me, remembering that in the back of your mind, to me means that when you're talking about taxation, you should recognize that that at the end of the day, that money belongs to the person who has it. It's not like government's money. It may seem like a distinction without a difference, but I think it's important for remembering just that government is not unlimited. Government doesn't have some automatic right to every dollar you have. Even though some of it is necessary for the sake of making the system work.
Okay, that makes sense. Now for the last juicy point. Now, I often ask political interviews, that sort of thing.
Sure.
A certain hypothetical. Now, I don't know if I'll change it just because of your, I guess. How comfortable with hypotheticals with Nazis with your, I guess.
Let's go for it. We've done that before. Yeah, Alrighty. Let's do it.
Alrighty, cool. Preference, I do not endorse any Nazi ideology, whatever. Got told to say that once because it sounded too weird. Just want to it makes it sound even weirder. But anyway, the hypothetical is basically, let's say you die and you go to heaven. God meets you at the gates and he goes, you know what? The Nazis are kind of right, Everything's sort of, no one sort of got it. It was sort of weird, But you know what, Bastiat? I like what you do. I liked your stream, okay? Tax is theft, I agree. So what I'm going to do is send you down now to Earth, and I'm going to give you the special power that once you want to let everyone know that Nazis are basically correct. And
Yeah.
so once you tell one person, everyone in the world will know, and you can't take back.
Yeah. So you're. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, so you can either do that, and so he'll send you back to Earth, and you can either tell everyone the truth, or you can hold on to it. If you tell everyone the truth, you go to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell.
Yeah.
How would you traverse that hypothetical?
I think in your situation, God is a Nazi,
Yeah,
right?
very much so.
Okay. I would tell Nazi God to get fucked and go to hell.
Okay.
Like if the creator of the universe is literally a universal dictator who is also a Nazi, then there's no point in tiptoeing around it, because either you're going to be a slave in heaven or you're going to go to hell. So I'd rather just say, fuck God, I'm going to hell.
Okay. But even though,
so that's one of the reasons why, as somebody who is not religious, I am glad that I think that it's really hard to imagine a situation where like I'd be comfortable with the existence of some kind of God, because by virtue of that, he would have to be, or she, or whatever, would have to be a sort of universal dictator. Like assuming one God in the traditional fashion is often, considered, it'd have to be a kind of universal dictator from which there would be no conceivable escape, because this God is indeed the Alpha and the Omega, right? There's no escape. There is no real freedom, right? Under that understanding of God. So I don't typically like to imagine the existence of that kind of God, and if that kind of God existed, I guess that's the best you can do is look him in the eye and tell him to get fucked, because that's you're either in that situation, you're either going to burn in hell or live as a slave. Now, that being said, I know it's easy to say that hypothetically. I imagine it might be a lot harder to say that directly to God. You'd probably be quaking in your boots in that situation, but that's what I at least like to imagine, I'd say. So
okay, yeah, I love that, because I get different answers every time. Usually,
Yeah.
it's quite weird. I sort of expect sort of a similar answer, but even how people respond to like the yes or no sort of thing. Like I remember Destiny's answer. Like Destiny's answer is like, yeah, I'll just tell people because it's the moral. Like he doesn't believe you should go against. Like if it's an omnipotent present God that really that's just the truth, and that's fine. Like he talks about it in a way like if there's a wall and you're on one side, another guy says it's orange over there, you sort of have to believe what he's going with because you can't see that other side of the wall.
Yeah, I mean that is kind of interesting to think about it, because I guess in my situation I'm saying my answer is kind of arrogant, because I'm saying you're wrong, creator of the universe. You're bullshit. That's bullshit. But I think ultimately, I don't know. I mean, to me, that's just another kind of like that is the rejection of the ultimate authority, right?
Is that free will confirmed?
No, I don't believe that there is free will. I could be persuaded otherwise, but I don't believe that there is such a thing as free will. I think it is all pretty much mechanical determinism. Yeah. Now, some people would say that that is kind of at odds with the whole freedom thing, but I don't think it is, because at the end of the day, whether you believe in determinism or free will, I don't think that really changes how you actually live your life, how you actually think about the world. I mean, free will is kind of a necessary sort of illusion. So I don't think that it really changes the way that I approach issues much, except that I feel like it makes me a little more benevolent, maybe. But so I'm not free will confirmed. I would like there to be free will, but I'm pretty sure the only way it can exist is for there to be some kind of deep scientific randomness that we're just not aware of yet, or some kind of spiritual, like supernatural kind of component to the way we think.
But then that ultimately become a little bit sort of circular in nature as well. Then
that's a good point, because then in that situation, if we're talking about a supernatural universe, then do you have free will in that situation? I don't know. It depends on the rules of the supernatural universe. So I don't really believe in free will. I think we are all on railroad tracks. But again, because of somebody in the chat, Alleycat1969 mentioned quantum flux. Maybe there is some deep randomness that changes this. But I do tend to believe that, as in to say, the argument that is most persuasive to me is that we are on basically railroad tracks that have been defined since the Big Bang or earlier or whatever, to the extent that there was an earlier. But nevertheless, just because of the way our human experience is, that doesn't change the way we live it, I think. So, um, gosh, one thing I would say though is that I'm not like 100% like yes, free will doesn't exist. I could be persuaded otherwise. So I think that's another reason why I don't like live under the notion that freedom is irrelevant, because it is possible that we just don't understand how free will works. But
Look, I got the perfect argument for why free will
okay,
exists. Okay?
okay,
People choose to believe Epstein didn't kill himself. Now,
yeah.
I feel like if free will didn't exist, no one would believe that. But
Well, I don't know. I think that depends on your belief as to. I mean, I think there are other factors at play there too. Like, what do you think about the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation? I want to go on record to say that I absolutely love, respect, and admire the work of Secretary Clinton, President Clinton, and indeed the Clinton Foundation to spread all kinds of good works and progress around the world. But of course, there are those who believe otherwise about the Clinton the Clinton conspiracy theories.
yeah,
But
even going on there, did you see the Howard Stern interview?
I did see part of it. Yeah.
Any thoughts from that? Because it seemed like it was a very much a different light for her to be seen in.
Yeah. Some people have said maybe she's going to run for president again. She's going to be like a dark horse candidate, but I kind of doubt it. But it's possible. I mean, that's like one explanation for why she bothered to do it in the first place, right? But then again, at that level of notoriety, maybe you just enjoy still being relevant, So
Yeah, maybe. I think it was just it seemed like it was a, I don't know, depends what you want to say it is. I think it was just a very interesting look at her.
Yeah.
Obviously, Howard Stern in the interview wasn't as hard as he possibly could be over certain points, but I think it was a very good one. That being said, I think it's time we wrap this one up because we've hit the hour mark. But thank you very much for joining me today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. For those who don't know you on my channel, who are you and how can they find you?
Sure. My name is Bastiat, and you can find me on twitch.tv/BASTIAT, Bastiat. The name, by the way, comes from a French economist by the name of Friedrich Bastiat. He died in, I think, 1850, 1851, but he was a real cool guy, wrote a lot of good works. My favorite being The Law by Friedrich Bastiat, published, I think, 1850. So that's who I'm named after, and that's how you can find me on Twitch. Be sure to check me out there, twitch.tv/BASTIAT. That's where I'm at now. Maybe we'll do a YouTube somewhere down the line, but right now that's home base.
That's the go-to. Well, right? Everyone, links down in the description below on the YouTube. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully stick around for the next interview.